Freaking out, man. You can't handle the truth. You can't handle the truth.
What do all men in power want? More power.
My name is Luca Zanna. I was an Italian by birth, and I became an American by choice. Our lives and freedoms are in danger. This is not a dream. If you're listening to this broadcasting, you are the resistance.
All systems go.
Welcome to Love, Guns, and Freedom.
We're not afraid.
Hi everybody, this is Luca Zanna, and you're listening to Love, Guns, and Freedom on K-Talks 1340 AM. Don't forget also, of course, to go to my website, lovegunsfreedom.com. As you very well know, the purpose of this show is to learn from each other, try to do everything we can to retake our republic back, to defend our rights, to retake our rights. There are sometimes things that seems almost impossible to do, and don't get me wrong, we have the duty to do it. Even Washington, we know that pretty much seems almost like only an act of God can take it back, and I agree. But sometimes, we do what we can, and at the same time, we must do for sure one thing. We must start from our own communities. We must start from our own families. Because at the end of the day, we have the opportunity now, still we have time, to pretty much prepare for what's coming and what's already here. If you're listening to the show, unless you're somebody who like to laugh, make fun of us, that's fine, it's your right. But if you listen to the show, you know what's going on. You understand what type of political, economical, and also, social situation we are facing, and we're already living. Economic turmoil, it's already here. You may not see it, but it happened long time ago. We are in depression, guys. The economic situation is not going to get better. The inflation is already in. I go shopping around and I can see prices. I'm the guy who shops in the family, and it's amazing, okay? And this is nothing yet. More important, we understand these wars and rumors of wars. Come on, guys. We are pretty much already in World War III. It's only a question when we're going to have in our own, on our land, here. And all the other situations that you can imagine. And don't forget also, there are a lot of problems that we know very well coming from a situation that we cannot control, like, for example, the sun, the sort of EMP, natural EMP, electromagnetic field, they may really come and, honestly, Congress said that as much as they're not doing anything to reinforce the grid, pretty much it's only a question of when it's going to happen. So we need to prepare. We must prepare. And in the preparation business, I think really I have today one of the best sources, one of the best minds out there that I've been following, studying, reading his books. And I really want to share with you today because there is a lot of things we can learn and a lot of things we can prepare today, right now. I have the honor and pleasure to have with me Mr. Joel Skousen. Mr. Skousen, are you there?
I am. It's good to be with you, Luca.
Thank you, sir. First of all, thank you very much. I know you're a busy man, and you are pretty much on big demand. You go everywhere. You have books. You have a DVD. And before I know a lot about you, but I think the best person to introduce yourself to the listeners, it's yourself. Tell us a little bit about your background politically, pretty much your studies. You call yourself like a political scientist, and everything pretty much you can tell us a little bit about you and your background, please.
Thank you, Luca. I started very early in life, about 17 years old. My uncle, W. Joel Skousen, was a great patriot, wrote the book The Naked Communist about communist infiltration into the U.S. State Department and the loss of many liberties of various countries through the influence of communists in the State Department. After reading that book, I decided, we've got a problem internal to our government because there were obviously people who weren't communist in our government who were protecting the communists and allowing them to operate within the second floor of the State Department, helping to overthrow Batista. We lost Cuba, to overthrow Somoza, where we lost Nicaragua, and Laos, Cambodia, Vietnam. And I eventually decided and learned that these were really the globalist had an agenda to use conflict creation and war to destabilize the world so that they could come in and save it. I initially started to go into the practice of law. My father was a lawyer, and but he died when I was 17, and so none of our 10 children in the family went into law. We went our own way, and I got a degree in political science, but it was a very leftist-oriented degree, and I was a libertarian-oriented person, a conservative libertarian. And so I really decided that I wasn't going to practice law, but I would rather learn the trade of architecture and engineering so that I could design the kinds of high-security residences that I thought would be necessary to protect myself for what looked very clearly like a government that was going to compromise our liberty.
Okay.
About that time, the Vietnam War came along.
Wow.
And I went into the Marine Corps as a infantry officer first, got switched to the air wing side when I developed shin splints, a very severe case of shin splints, running in combat boots in training. They gave me the option to leave the Marine Corps to go learn to fly, and so I chose to become a pilot and flew the F-4 and the A-4 Skyhawk. So I know a lot about how government works, how the military works, got out of the military after the Vietnam conflict, and started my own firm. I was really one of the pioneers in the survival movement clear back in 1979. I published my first book, The Secure Home, on how to design high-security residences and retreats. And then I worked for some 40 years and still do that, designing high-security residences and retreats all around the nation. But I also took of absence, Luca, in the 1980s to serve as the chairman of the Conservative National Committee in Washington, D.C. Mm-hmm. And at that same time, I was editor of the Conservative Digest under Richard Viguerie. I also traveled extensively in Latin America and Central America, lived in Uruguay and in Argentina for a few years, also in Guatemala and El Salvador, where I helped worked as a political advisor for the Arena Party in El Salvador and helped in establishing many of the libertarian parties in Guatemala.
Wow.
So I've had significant experience in world affairs. I speak multiple foreign languages and thus read a lot of news services around the world to avoid the kind of controlled news that we get here in the United States. And then in 1998, I started, because of my experience in Washington, I actually started this newsletter, the World Affairs Briefing, in 1984 when I was in Washington. I let it go for several years because of the difficulty of publishing paper products while I was still trying to work in my architectural field. But around the year Y2K, when it came up, Dr. Gary North, who was really the leader of the Y2K preparedness movement, mm-hmm. asked me to come on board as a consultant to help people understand the principles of where to relocate for security in case there's a social meltdown. And so I began, because of my experience working all around North America designing high security homes, I found I had the expertise to help people understand the principles of strategic relocation and to help analyze the pros and cons of various areas in the country. And that led to my publishing of the book, my second book, Strategic Relocation, North American Guide to Safe Places, in the year 2000.
Yes.
And I've also started up my newsletter again, the World Affairs Brief, which has been in continuous publication since 1999. And so I've got almost 20 years analyzing the world situation from a conservative libertarian point of view, and that's where we stand today on my background.
Perfect. By the way, guys, if you're listening or if you're just tuning in right now, you're listening to Love, Guns, and Freedom with Luca Zanna, and the special guest today I have the honor to have with me is Mr. Joel Skousen. And very important, by the way, all the things you said. First of all, there is a website that I invite everybody to go because there is a lot of information. And the more important, I really suggest you to get these books. And I'm not even here, I'm not getting paid. I tell you, as a act of love, these books can be the most priceless values for your family, for your community. Because at the end of the day, remember, the government is not going to take care of you, okay? This is not going to happen. We know very well. The government will take care of itself if it can. What we got to do here, we got to count on each other. We got to count on our neighbors. And we got to count on your family. So please go to joelskousen.com. And by the way, if you go to today's show, you will go to the page. I always post the page, lovegunsfreedom.com. I will put a link directly to Mr. Skousen website. Pretty impressive background, Mr. Skousen. Now, I have a question, more than a question. You know, there are so many questions. Let me start with one, first of all. You were saying your background in the military, of course, and then you started as consultant, as pretty much in the creation, in the design of home security. If you can give us pretty much a basic, I know it would take a book, you wrote a book about that, by the way, the secure home, but as a general basic foundation, if somebody needs to start to look for a new place where to move, let's start first of all from the United States. In your opinion, what are the three first states, the best states, if you can consider according to your parameters, that you would suggest to relocate? If you can give us at least 3 or 4 states. And that,
Well, the highest rated, first is a bit of background. We have to understand there are a lot of threats that require relocation. The big damage, I don't care whether the threat is war or earthquake or tornadoes or economic collapse, the big problem that we all face is high-density population areas. In other words, it's high-density populations that are your big threat because in any cutoff of society from the infrastructure, government infrastructure, of which you're totally dependent upon in a high-density urban area, all of a sudden nobody has any food, nobody has any water, nobody has any way to get those things. They can't grow a garden instantly. They can't get water out of the ground. They go into a panic mode, and you have instant social unrest. And so my basic focus in the book Strategic Relocation is, first of all, understand the threats of high-density urban areas. In contrast to that, people don't have much choice because, they must stay generally within population centers because that's where the jobs are. So that's the major conflict here. So as I talked in the Y2K controversy, I encourage people, I said, don't get outside your financial lifeline. If self-sufficiency and rural living can be very expensive just because it takes a lot of money to have the equipment, the tools, and the solar and the generators to run in a self-sufficient manner. You can't afford to get beyond your financial lifeline. And a lot of people did in Y2K. They went out and sold everything, quit their job, moved to a rural country, and quickly ran out of money. And I was consulting with a lot of people afterwards about, how to get reintegrated back into society in a way in which you can do both. And so most people have to stay within society because of their job, but relocation, first of all, the first step is probably for most people to relocate to the periphery of urban areas so that you're not in the middle of it.
Yes.
You're at the edge of it, so that if things do break down, you can get out without having to transverse, 20 miles of traffic areas in the LA basin, for example, or Phoenix, before you can get to places that you set up for a retreat.
yes.
So for those people who are retired, for those people who have the flexibility of a job situation whereby they can move, they can relocate permanently, then my highest rated areas are in the what I call the Intermountain West. The lowest rated areas are generally in the East Coast area, where your population densities are up to 1,000 per square mile. In the Intermountain West, average population density is about 35 people per square mile. A big difference. My top-rated areas states are Utah and Idaho, both 5-star rated states. And one of the reasons why they're very, very highly rated is that they are hundreds of miles through trackless desert or mountains from Denver, from San Francisco, from Los Angeles, from Seattle. There's just an awful lot of dry desert country between there, which means it is going to be very difficult for social unrest to reach these intermountain areas in a crisis. So those are my highest rated areas. Now that doesn't mean that people can't find security much closer to home. It's just that you have to realize that you have to look at what I call specific site criteria to avoid the paths of social unrest will lead the cities. Now, you're in northern Arizona, is that correct?
Yes, northwest Arizona, let's say exactly Mojave County.
Mojave County.
Yeah.
So you see, there are really no big areas except for, I guess the Las Vegas area is probably the closest.
Las Vegas areas, yes.
Yeah. And what's interesting about this area where you are at, for example, is that your major threat area comes from the LA basin.
Yes.
And from the Phoenix area, and there are really only 2 or 3 major highways that lead out of those areas toward the higher safety to the north in the Intermountain West.
Mm-hmm.
There's I-5, there's Highway 93 leaving out of Vegas into the Nevada desert, and there's Highway 89 leading north from Flagstaff to Utah that goes around the Grand Canyon. But that Grand Canyon's a major blocking effect that channels the traffic either to the left through, Bullhead City and Las Vegas, or up 89 through Page, Arizona, into Utah. And so I think, first of all, those highways, of course, are going to be very, very clogged. It's very difficult for people to get around without those 2 highways. But to a certain extent, they're going to stop a lot of refugee traffic going very far north just because of those blockages.
Mm-hmm.
And so people, when they're thinking about getting out of high-density areas, they have to think about those different routes. I think because of the fact that there's only these 2 or 3 routes leading northward to safety, that people have to have advance warning. You just don't want to be on the last train out of town. You have to prepare in advance with fuel, with a retreat place, even if it's joining forces with friends or family. If you can't afford to do it yourself, but you have to have a place to go, and you have to be able to stockpile fuel either in your home so that you don't have to go line up at the gas station in a panic where everyone else is trying to get fuel to get out of town.
Mr. Skousen, let me interrupt 1 second. Sometimes I talk about these things with friends, family, and also sometimes with people that we just talk. And a lot of people understand it. Right now, honestly, if you're not smelling the what type of dangers we are facing, is so close. But regardless, it's your duty, but also it's your right to just ignore it. All I want to say for the people that are still pretty much in denial, and they may smile at this and keep going with their driving and go to sip in their coffee or whatever. Guys, my family went through this. World War II in Anzio, Rome area. My family had to live in pretty much in the wilderness for months. And we never really felt it. We never really tasted the bitterness to live like animals, to eat grass, to eat things that normally you wouldn't eat, to understand that maybe today could be your last meal. I mean, the point is, if you believe in God, and this is, of course, I'm not trying to preach you guys, but if you believe in God, you know also that it is not your right to take your life. And I'm not afraid of dying. That's not the point. You know very well what I think about that. But I'm afraid to be left here in hell. And as human beings, we have dignity. And also we have the duty to take care of ourselves and to live with some basic human rights conditions. So what we're trying to do here is not try to scare you out, but to try to put in your brain that time is the essence, and we never know when things can change. And when things going to happen, like when you see in these movies, that to look for a gallon of water, people kill themselves, or to look for gasoline, you have to stay 6 hours pretty much waiting, and you never know if you're going to make it. I mean, guys, we have the opportunity now to prepare yourself. So I really say, please listen carefully, have an open mind, and more important, trying to get the books of Mr. Skousen. And what I really like about these books, especially this one we're talking right now, Strategic Relocation, everything is saying is so detailed. Every area is pretty much divided with different criterias, and it's not just, of course, the weather or even the weather, but also the violent crime, also the economic development, what type of freedoms you can get. I mean, there is a very thrill job. I mean, to understand, and there's never going to be a perfect place because we're still living on planet Earth after all, but at least we can start to do the best we can to try to take care of our families. Mr. Skousen, I really like, by the way, when you break down the areas, also considering many aspects, for example, even the aspect like nuclear power, because to have a nuclear power close to you, especially if there is some sort of a natural disaster, could be a very dangerous. I mean, even some great area or even military bases, for example. What do you think about that? How can you articulate?
Well, that's right, Luca. Nuclear weapons, in fact, are much less dangerous to your long-term health than a meltdown of a nuclear power plant, because gamma radiation dissipates within 2 to 3 weeks in a nuclear explosion. But the long-term isotopes left over from a nuclear power plant meltdown last for 30 to 60 years and can give a lot of long-term damage. So, the nuclear power plants in the Phoenix area are a danger to that area. There are not many more out west. Most of the power plants are out east. They're shutting down. A lot of them in the west and in the California coast as well. So even though I'm in favor of nuclear power as a very inexpensive and clean energy source, it is a danger in a war scenario. And I'm not sure, frankly, and I point this out in Strategic Relocation, that the Russians or Chinese intend to attack nuclear power plants. I don't think they do initially, at least, because their strategy really is to target the U.S. military and U.S. missile silos so that they can blackmail us into submission. Neither of these countries can sustain themselves without Western trade and technology. So they don't want to destroy these countries. They want to take down the U.S. military. And unfortunately, our government is disarming at an alarming rate and setting us up, I think, for that kind of a military takedown. I explain that in quite detail in my World Affairs Brief as well as in Strategic Relocation. But I think that's our major problem, is that our government, if they betray our military by not allowing us to launch on warning in a missile attack, we could have our military decapitated. I think our globalist leaders would, in fact, come out of their bunkers. I mean, they know this attack is coming. That's why they're building deep underground bunkers and new ones as we speak. They'll come out of their bunkers and say, well, gee, we didn't know about this. The Russians and Chinese deceived us. But now our only hope is to create a militarized global government in order to prosecute this war. And we'll end up losing our liberties through a war which they bring upon us by purposeful disarming and setting us up for a nuclear first strike. I think, of course, if we don't have an economic meltdown before that time, we certainly will at the time of war, because Russian and Chinese military doctrine states that there will be a nuclear or EMP strike minutes before the physical strike on the military, so as to cause the maximum amount of disruption. Without electrical power, there's going to be social unrest in all of the U.S. cities, and very difficult to survive in those cities. It'll be a Mad Max scenario, I think, unless people can get out of those cities and have places to retreat to.
Mr. Skousen, I would like to share with you my personal, humble idea, opinion, or fears. Let's be honest. Even I'm not really, I'm not going to try to look like I'm not afraid, but I understand that This is part of our existence and our challenge, our trial. So I'm not really afraid of this. I'm just fearful, first of all, who's coming after us. And more important, I'm afraid as Americans, as a human beings also, that we could stop this. But unfortunately, people sometimes they seem to be too busy or too scared to even face this reality. Now, I'll tell you my little general picture and tell me if I'm really off or maybe I'm just, reading too many books. First of all, I believe our biggest danger, it's already here. The walls. We have within our walls, we have our traders. And I'm not just saying one trader. It's been, as you said, the Communist Party has been infiltrating this country since way before Obama, okay? This has happened a long time ago. Now, honestly, I think they are finalizing their dream and they have pretty much the big Manchurian candidate directly in the locked room, the glass room where there are all the controlled bottoms. That's my opinion. I really stay firm behind it. But this didn't happen by accident. As you said, they need to create a global government. To create a global government, they must destroy America, and not just economically or morally. Right? They already done that. They need to destroy also America militarily. Now, I would like to remind to the listeners that for the first time in American history, we have a president or somebody acting as a president, Mr. Obama. They pretty much allow FEMA to have a special agreement with the Russian troops that in 2013 this agreement was signed, where pretty much in case of any emergency, national emergency, the Russian troops will come on U.S. soil. And they're already here. Are you aware of that, Mr. Skousen?
I'll comment about that when you finish your...
Okay. So first of all, we already have this sort of connection. Then we have Chinese troops in Hawaii since the last couple of years doing joint exercise with our military. As Mr. Skousen said, we have the lowest level of pretty much army and national security. I mean, talking about our defenses, our national defenses, all our troops. They are like the lowest level, like before World War II. Then this unilaterally treaty, or pretty much Obama just removing our nuclear advantage. It's pretty much they completely decapitate us, our nuclear strength. We know very well that China, meanwhile, has been acquiring through the latest administration, started with the Clinton, to have our technology. So we do not have anymore the technology edge. Now we have one huge debt that pretty much is being created and planned by the globalist elites in our government to put us in submission, in bondage, not just with the private Federal Reserve, but also with the China as creditors. Now they create this sort of also moral opportunity for Russia and China. China because pretty much we owe them money, and Russia because we are minding their business in Ukraine. Now, whenever they need to attack us, they will have the moral edge. They will have the high stand. They don't want to destroy this country. They want to take over because they need to colonize, especially the Chinese. They need land. They need resources. And these are the collaterals. Now, there is pretty much the situation that we will face one day, that after the first strike maybe, or whenever strike is going to happen. Remember, there was a video from FBI agent Larry Gradwell. It was a Bill Ayers Weather Underground pretty much meeting, where they have this meeting where they wanted to plan how to take over America. And I will play this later again. And their plan was, first of all, to invite all the foreign countries pretty much sympathetic to their political agenda, their communist agenda, like the Russians, like the Nicaraguans, like the Venezuelans, like the Cubans. And then at that point, the Chinese divide America in different regions, pretty much is already there, the FEMA regions, and then get the 25, 30 millions of people like us that we will never go down with the new world order agenda, and they put us in camps and they will kill us all. This is my humble opinion. What do you think about this?
Well, that's a long scenario to comment on, but you have some very good points. I do have a little bit different view in a few different areas. First of all, I do not think, and I've done a lot of investigation about this in my World Affairs brief, but there's been a lot of hype about foreign troops in the country. There, in fact, have never been over 100 Russian troops doing joint military training at any one time in the nation. And the FEMA flack about having a deal with Russia has never gone into effect. I don't think it ever will go into effect. A lot of what the government does is to provoke with disinformation kind of a firestorm of controversy within the conservative side of the internet. And a lot of this is done to track, with the NSA equipment, to track who reacts to this and who spreads it around. And they build their lists of dissidents on the right with this kind of disinformation.
Okay.
And I think it's very important to realize that the more credible scenario, I think, is that the U.S. is militarizing our own police, hiring more and more thuggish ex-military people into police forces. I think there'll be many more. They'll be clearly able to take down dissidents using our own internal corrupt police departments, and then the necessity. For example, once Russia and China attack the United States, there's no way the U.S. would ever accept, foreign troops, especially, from these communist-backed or based countries to come in and take down American dissidents. I think that the United States, under globalism, will do it on their own to our own people, just as Nazi Germany used their own brown shirts and shock troops to take down their own people. I think it's very important to understand that our government is setting us up for an initial first strike, and I pointed out in my writings about PDD 60. This is Presidential Decision Directive 60, signed in 1997 by President Clinton. This instructed our nuclear forces to not rely on launch on warning, but to prepare to absorb a nuclear first strike and then retaliate afterwards. General Butch Neal at the time said, retaliate with what?
Yeah.
Once you allow a first strike to fall, all our missile silos are gone, every one of them. And our military bases have been hit. And I think the globalists are knowing that strike is coming. That's why they're building huge underground bunkers, even new bunkers. They've abandoned essentially Cheyenne Mountain and built a lot more secret bunkers. Knowing that Cheyenne Mountain is going to be hit, they intend to survive, and they aren't warning the American people about what they themselves are planning for. I know, being one of the top designers at high-security residences and retreats, that a lot of ex-DEA, CIA, and FBI higher-ups, when they retire, they are having bunkers built in the bottom of their homes in Colorado and other places because they know something big is coming.
Wow.
Something very destructive. So I think what's going to happen, because of PDD 60, I think our military forces, even though they think that they are still going to do launch on warning, and if your listeners don't know what that is, that means when our satellites detect a Russian, Chinese nuclear attack or North Korean attack on America, we can launch our missiles before those missiles arrive on target. We can launch our missiles, and so their missiles incoming hit empty silos. Our missiles are already in the air being retargeted on their facilities, and so the one who launches second in a nuclear scenario wins rather than the one who launches first. But if the U.S., in fact, doesn't allow our launch codes to go out to our missiles and forces our military to absorb the nuclear first strike, then we've really decapitated our own military, and our leaders come out of their bunkers and say, wow, we've lost our military ability to respond. Our only solution now is that we must form a militarized global government to prosecute this war. And I personally think, Luca, that they've got a lot of secret weapon system they've been developing that they will not use to defend America, but they will pull them out and use them to stop any further attacks once they've convinced everyone to go into this global new world order, this militarized government. They'll bring out space-based interceptors and other things to keep any further nuclear attacks occurring while they regroup under a NATO-based European army. They're already talking about doing an EU army for global reaction. It's getting a lot of flack in Europe, but that's already being floated. So that's how I believe the scenario will come out. In fact, I think that North Korea is probably going to be the trigger event for World War III. There has to be a reason to explain why the United States treats North Korea with complete permissiveness.
Mm-hmm.
It has nuclear weapons, it has missiles to deliver them, and yet we claim there's no regime change needed, there's no military option on the table for North Korea, and yet compare that to Iran. Doesn't even have a nuclear weapon yet, only has regional missiles, fairly minor capability, and yet we keep demanding that Iran be taken down. And Israel, of course, has been tasked by the globalists to attack Iran. There's right now a bunch of political theater going on where Israel is pretending like he's got a war going on with Obama. And Obama, there's lots of disinformation being planted about Obama trying to get this nuclear deal with Iran. That's really just political theater right now to make it appear as if the U.S. is not in favor of attacking Iran, when in fact it is part of the globalist agenda. Not because that's going to trigger World War III. Russia and China will not come to the rescue of either Syria or Iran any more than they did of Iraq. They're more ready, first of all, to take on the West. Their newest weapon systems won't be going online until the beginning of next decade. So we're really going to see a long, slow build-up to the war. Russia, for example, uses these Middle East wars where we attack Iraq and Syria and other places like that. They use it to eavesdrop on our military communications and develop their own electronic jamming systems. You know, the U.S. has a cakewalk when we go into these relatively primitive military countries and attack. But going up against Russia and China someday, who are copying all of our electronic jamming type equipment and use EMP and other things, we're going to have a real difficult battle with that. And I think our globalist leaders are, in fact, intending us to take the hit, the first hit, so that when we get, they can justify this new global military. But they've got a lot of secret weapon systems that I think they're going to bring to bear. My personal theory is also that the U.S. in the middle of World War III will cut a deal with China to attack Russia's rear, just like we cut a deal with Russia to attack, Hitler's rear, so that Hitler was finally eliminated. But I think Russia will be eliminated in the Third World War, and then China will become the new Cold War enemy. The globalists will love that because that will justify keeping the global military together, not giving back individual sovereignty because of the great threat of China as the new Cold War enemy after World War III.
Mr. Skousen, I would like to interact 1 second. There is another, of course, now we are talking about scenarios, okay? And only God knows really how all this is going to happen. But for sure, something, and I say for sure, I always hope it's not going to happen. But unfortunately, logic, and all the evidence, they're bringing us that we are going to face something that no other country probably, or never this generation, or any other American generations ever faced. Now, things may be different. Maybe the Russians, they're not going to be the ones. At the same time, I also say, let's look at everything. Probably we don't have many troops. All I know that we are facing right now something that is pretty much black and white. We have a man that is doing everything he can in the White House to pretty much weaken our defenses. I mean, are you familiar, Mr. Skousen, with Obama shutting down the Southern Air Defense System? That was in 2013. I mean, this is pretty much something that now we have to rely on Mexico. And by the way, we may not have Russians, but according to the North American agreement, we already have this sort of collaboration between Canadian troops and Mexican troops, also to be used for the common perimeter of the North America. So what do you think about this also shutting down the Southern Air Defense System by Obama in 2013?
No, it actually didn't occur. That was disinformation on the net.
Good.
And there's an awful lot of that going on. Remember, Luca, that Obama isn't a communist anymore.
Okay.
He was raised as a communist. He doesn't have an agenda. He isn't religious. He isn't Christian. He isn't Muslim. He's become a puppet of the globalists.
Yes, I agree with you completely.
And, he takes orders from advisors. There's globalist foreign policy advisors aligned with the Council on Foreign Relations, and there are very leftist domestic foreign policy advisors. But this guy sits and takes orders, doesn't have an agenda himself. He's got many skeletons in his closet, from his illegal background to his false Social Security card to his former stint with the CIA and other things, that they've got a lock hold on him. He can't do anything except what they tell him to do.
Yes.
But George W. Bush was just as much a globalist puppet. He wasn't running the country. His main handler was Dick Cheney, a major globalist. When he was vice president, had a staff of over 600 instead of the normal 25 for a vice president.
Wow.
But there's a tremendous amount of disinformation about loose nukes, about the South Carolina lost nuke incidents. All of that was completely bogus. We have to be careful. There are government disinformation evidence planting false stories throughout the internet. One of the things I try to do in my World Affairs Brief is really check those things out and find out what is going on in reality.
Good, and I'm glad. That's why this show for me is so important, because I keep learning, and first of all, learn from my guest, and also I like to learn from every one of us. Now, the point is, guys, we have now still the time to try to do whatever we can to be prepared, because always going to be the Russians, always going to be the Chinese, always going to be Homeland Security with all these billions of rounds and armored vehicles. The point, something, it's happening. And the economic situation, we see it. It's crumbling. The numbers, they are not there. And more important now, another topic I would like to touch with Mr. Skousen. We are no more in a republic. In my humble opinion, according to the facts that I'm reading, when I studied the history of this country before I became a citizen, and during also my study to become a citizen, we're supposed to have been a republic with 3 different branches. Now, guys, regardless if you're leaning left, right, center, doesn't matter. If you believe that we have a republic with independent branches of government, we already lost that. Right now, in my opinion, we're living in a new tyranny. And pretty much we're at the time of Julius Caesar crossing the Rubicon. What do you think about that? Are we still in a republic, or we're living under some sort of the new empire with Obama giving orders and ignoring Congress?
Well, I agree completely that the Constitution is dead. They only honor it when it is convenient. If you end up being on the wrong side of their agenda, you can be locked away without any habeas corpus rights, without any speedy trial provisions. All they have to do is, they don't have to justify anything. They can just lock you away. They have secret black sites now. Chicago's not the only one. So you're absolutely right, as I say, but Obama isn't running this show.
No.
The globalists, in fact, run both major political parties. We've seen this in the recent betrayal of John Boehner of the executive amnesty order, a complete and utter betrayal by both Senator McConnell in the Senate and John Boehner in the House.
Yes.
It's just despicable what's happened. So, but you're right, as a political scientist on the libertarian conservative side, I've long written in my works about the fact of we're not supposed to be a raw democracy. That's not what the Constitution established. It was a constitutionally limited representative republic, and where we have a constitution which limits the lawmaking power, and those limits have been interpreted away. It's going to be very difficult to restore that because of the fact that we have so much case law which interprets. The lawyers don't care if you want the Constitution restored. They know how to interpret it.
Yes. And I would like to say something about the communism. Guys, if you learn a little bit, communism was created, financed by bankers. And the reason why, it's a good way pretty much to destroy the competition. That's the bottom line. So even when we have somebody like Obama that is acting like a communist, after all, as Mr. Skousen said, it is not doing this because they want to redistribute all this wealth to the people. It's pretty much, it's another way to control and destroy the competition. And at the end of the day, communism was financed by the international bankers. The Bolshevik revolution would have not even continued if it wasn't financed by the international bankers. So Obama, even he wants to look around like is Mr. Che Guevara or some sort of a red hat beret, after all, is working for the same bankers, the Bushes and the Clinton, and pretty much almost every other president in the last 40 years. They've been, since JFK was the last one, in my opinion, that tried at least to warn us on some area, even of course with his faults, with his imperfections, but it wasn't an accident that he got killed 2 weeks pretty much after his executive order that he was trying to put out to retake control of the currency. Now, just to change 1 second approach, what can we do to, in your opinion, as a regular person, first of all, to try to be proactive in retake this republic back, and at the same time to do everything. I know it's probably a big question, especially for the end of the show, but at the same time to try to take care of our family. What can we do?
Well, first of all, let me just make a couple of comments about your introductory comments. In the first place, it isn't just bankers that are the problem. It is globalists,
yes,
who have taken control of the money and therefore made them wealthy through control of certain banks, especially the 6 major banks. Mm-hmm. But just being wealthy or just being a banker doesn't mean it's necessarily evil. It has to be tied to globalism. There is an evil agenda. It's been going on for centuries. They did finance the Bolshevik Revolution, and they did so for some very complex reasons. But most of all, this is to create conflict through wars, because through wars you can create enough destruction and catastrophe that you can talk people into anything almost.
Yes.
In the aftermath of war, rather than having to convince them at the ballot box. But in terms of, given that we're dealing with a massive conspiracy of power that controls both major parties, and given that most of even our good people, especially the Christians in this nation, have a very poor track record of being able to see deception in wolves and sheep's clothing. You can get a George W. Bush proclaiming to be a Christian. He can deceive a lot of people. I think they chose George W. Bush specifically because he was a Republican and a Christian, and that he could deceive the people who would most reject those things if it were done by a Democrat. Mm-hmm. They're very adept at this. Yes. I think, in fact, they're going to give us another Republican in 2016. It won't be Hillary Clinton. It'll be another compromised Republican, because that's the best way to undo all of the growing backlash against Obama, is to give them a Jeb W. Bush or a Chris Christie or a controlled Republican like that.
Yeah.
Now, in terms of what do we do, I personally, Luca, am very pessimistic about being able to restore the original republic. Mm. And the reason I say that is because, first of all, we have a nearly corrupt majority of people who love their benefits, even those that aren't taking benefits. There's a lot of well-to-do people who support public benefits for foreign aid and all of these other personal things, for national public radio and other things, because they're not having to pay. They want to force everyone else to pay. And it's this socialist agenda that is so attractive, because we don't have to pay for public schooling. We force everybody else to pay for it. Yeah. So we get these lavish schools that we don't have to pay for. Mm-hmm. And it's very, very enticing. And I just don't think you undo that by the ballot box once you've lost the constitutional restrictions. Yeah. You basically have to make it illegal, so that even if a communist gets elected, he can't do anything, because it's against the Constitution to do it. Of course, you have to have courts that uphold the Constitution, which we do not. So we now have controlled courts. We have about 75% of Congress that they have enough dirt on that they can control. We have controlled executive. And even most state governments are very much controlled by this same agenda and corrupt. They start surveilling state senators and state governors early on so that as they progress up the political ladder, they've got dirt on them and they can keep them under control. So first of all, what I think is we ought not to count on winning back the nation as a whole for liberty. I think at best we're going to be able to create pockets of resistance and liberty to the New World Order.
Yes.
And that's one of the silver linings, I think, about the coming war that's going to come, that the globalists are going to bring upon us. And Russia and China are not directly controlled by the globalists, but they are inducing this strike by creating weakness, by disarming when they should be arming, inviting this strike, and then provoking it in different ways, as in Ukraine and other things that you pointed out. But the silver lining is that in a war of chaos and social unrest, the good people who are awake, who are now distributed evenly around the United States, they all feel alone. You and I feel alone. You know, even in conservative Utah or Idaho, you're still, the majority of people, even though they may claim to be conservative, are clueless about the secret combinations of power that run this country. And but I think in a war, the good people will be driven out of the major cities. There'll no longer be jobs to hold them. There'll only be threats. And I think by the inspiration of God, a lot of people are going to find their way to these safer areas of the country, and there will be new majorities formed. And if we enlighten and work to enlighten our conservative and libertarian constituencies so they understand what it takes to rebuild this republic, at least to pockets of republic, a Western states coalition, for example, that can fight against the New World Order. You know, they have to play lip service to democracy. And if we have new majorities in these areas that won't go along with the globalist agenda, to a certain extent, they have to respect that. There'll be time that can be bought, in other words, to build and consolidate these majorities. So that's my hope, that what you and I are doing, Luca, is to try to make people realize, don't spin your wheels trying to control a Congress which is already lost, or a presidency which is already compromised, where the media is compromised. We need to affect our efforts in local politics, to have local principled people, to get rid of thuggish police. I noticed in your website, in the blog that was following the comments about the Bullhead City Police and all the corruption going on there. It's the same with the Las Vegas police. We need to try to cull out those thuggish police people. We need to have dependable sheriffs that won't betray us, that won't go along with federal government, dependable local officials that will defend the Second Amendment and our ability to defend ourselves.
I completely agree with you, by the way, and we need to start to look in our counties, and there is also, I will talk on this show, we have also a guest talking about the Constitutional County Project. I think it's pretty much
Navajo County in Arizona.
Yes, Navajo County, Arizona, great place, and I think that could be really much the antidote against this virus of this New World Order. We need to start from small areas, decentralizing from Washington, and think that America, it's wherever we are. We can bring back the America of our founding fathers in our communities. We don't need to change and, pretty much try to bring back to sanity a few hundreds of congressmen that already been pretty much paid off or compromised. Instead, in our counties, we can start to work with our county sheriff, with our county supervisor, with our system, judicial system, and bring good people back into these positions, and we can still live with an educated population, backing them up as America used to be. I want to say, first of all, thank you very much, Mr. Skousen. And I want to remind one more time your website and the beautiful books that you have there. And please go ahead. I want to give you the floor for the last 2 minutes. Talk everywhere with people. They can reach you, we can reach you, and how we can buy your books.
Thank you. My main website is www.joelskousen.com. Skousen is Skousen. And that's where all of my books are covered. But we can also go to my other website, worldaffairsbrief.com, where I talk about the world situation, and people can get a free sample copy by emailing me at editor@worldaffairsbrief.com.
Perfect, perfect. And I suggest you seriously to take a look all his books. The best one, in my opinion, I mean, they're all great. They are different topics, but I like also very much the secure home. I mean, that was something that I can see also your expertise in engineering, and there was something that I don't have the time to talk right now in this hour. I may maybe read an extract in the next hour about how to create walls that they are pretty much bulletproof. I'm talking about with a high caliber rifle without even using any special fancy material. I'm sure you remember about that. It's
Yes, my gravel wall construction that I designed
Yes.
really works.
You know what? Let's see if I have another 60 seconds. Let's. You know what? You have 2 minutes. Can you spell it out? Pretty much the concept.
Yeah, the concept is that you can take even a 3.5-inch wall, a normal stud wall. I prefer to use steel studs rather than wood studs because, and then you fill it with 1/2-inch gravel and with plywood on either side of the steel studs. And literally you can shoot hundreds of rounds of .308 military grade rifle, and a 3.5-inch wall stops it and keeps chewing up the rounds. It never degrades. It's tremendously inexpensive, and it works. It's a very powerful anecdote.
By the way, I tested out. It really works. And I need to do a YouTube probably about that. Listen, Mr. Skousen, thank you very much. And please keep us updated. And I'll be happy to have you anytime you want back on the show.
Yes, I'd like to do it again with you, Luca. Enjoyed this very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Skousen. That was Mr. Joel Skousen, and you're listening to Love, Guns, and Freedom on K-Talks 1340 AM. Don't go away. Ready for hour number 2. It's going to be about guns, rights, and tactics.
I brought up the subject of what's going to happen after we take over the government. We become responsible then for administrating, 250 million people. And there was no answers. No one had given any thought to economics. How are you going to clothe and feed these people? The only thing that I could get was that they expected that the Cubans and the North Vietnamese and the Chinese and the Russians would all want to occupy different portions of the United States. They also believed that their immediate responsibility would be to protect against what they called the counter-revolution. And they felt that this counter-revolution could best be guarded against by creating and establishing re-education centers in the Southwest, where we would take all the people who needed to be re-educated into the new way of thinking and teach them how things were going to be. I ask, well, what is going to happen to those people that we can't re-educate, that are die-hard capitalists? And the reply was that they'd have to be eliminated. And when I pursued this further, they estimated that they would have to eliminate 25 million people in these re-education centers. And when I say eliminate, I mean kill 25 million people. I want you to imagine sitting in a room with 25 people, most of which have graduate degrees from Columbia and other well-known educational centers, and hear them figuring out the logistics for the elimination of 25 million people. And they were dead serious.
You're listening to Love, Guns, and Freedom with Luca Zanna on United States.fm network.